by passing a long-term comprehensive FAA reauthorization bill with an overwhelming bipartisan majority that directly addresses several key aspects of air traffic control staffing, including requiring the FAA to use the Collaborative Resource Workgroup, the CRWG, as the basis for its controller workforce plan and to maximize controller hiring for the duration of this bill. I want to individually thank the members, committee leadership, and staff who took the time to understand the critical staffing and reporting issues, evaluated and formulated the solutions consisting of max hiring and required CRWG reporting, and ultimately crafted and supported the approved language in the FAA reauthorization bill. Thank you. There are over 1,000 fewer certified professional controllers today than there were a decade ago. Continuing to follow the same flawed model utilized by the FAA after more than a decade of missed hiring goals and missed staffing projections will continue this downward staffing trend. A new approach is desperately needed. The FAA must adopt the recently updated and more accurate operational staffing targets that were jointly developed by the Collaborative Resources Workgroup, which was comprised of the FAA's Air Traffic Organization and NACA. The MITRE Corporation verified and validated this group's work. The facility staffing targets the FAA utilized today were developed almost a decade ago. It is beyond time to update them. The new CRWG staffing targets need to be used as the basis for the FAA's controller workforce plan moving forward so that Congress and industry have a complete and accurate understanding of the condition of ATC staffing and the requirements of the NAS. Understaffing requires the FAA to assign mandatory overtime to controllers, including 6-day work weeks, which leads to fatigue. Several FAA facilities require 6-day work weeks every single week. Air traffic control is already a highly stressful profession. Controllers that are required to work 200 hours per month amplifies that fatigue, and it inserts additional risk into the NAS as a result of this understaffing. In June, the DOTIG issued an audit concluding that while the United States has one of the safest air traffic systems in the world, a lack of fully certified controllers poses a potential risk to the national operations. Earlier this month, the FAA's National Airspace System Safety Review Team concluded that under FAA's most recent controller workforce plan that was submitted to Congress, when retirements and other attrition are accounted for, the hiring plan produces a negligible improvement over today's understaffed levels, resulting in a net increase of fewer than 200 air traffic controllers by the year 2032. Let me repeat that. The current plan presented to you results in a net increase of fewer than 200 air traffic controllers by the year 2032. We applaud the T&I committee for its bill that directs the FAA to adopt controller staffing targets to resolve these issues identified by both the DOTIG and the NAS Safety Review Team. But the FAA must also be transparent with its need for increased funding for its F&E budget. Congress has always met the FAA's stated need, but the agency has consistently requested less than it needs for runways, radar systems, towers, and all of its infrastructure. In fact, for the past 15 years, the FAA hasn't even adjusted their request to account for normal inflation. Utilizing a fix-on-fail model has led to the FAA's inability to maintain and replace critical safety equipment that has exceeded its expected life, again introducing risks into the system. The failure of the U.S. NOTAM system earlier this year was a glaring example of that risk. FAA funding requests have delayed the FAA from designing and implementing new technologies to improve safety. One such example is an airport surface surveillance awareness tool that addresses runway incursions, a top safety concern. Finally, I want to stress the need to avoid an FAA shutdown at the end of this year that would force the FAA to suspend hiring, close its training academy, and delay modernization even more, which would be a major setback. Thank you again for helping us to resolve these issues. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Santa, for being here. We know this is the beginning of a very busy period for you. Mr. Bradbury, you're recognized for 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of AAAE. It's truly an honor to be here. I serve as Vice Chair of AAAE's Federal Affairs Committee, and in my day job, I lead the Portland International Jetport in Portland, Maine, a vibrant and growing small hub airport. I've been at the airport, PWM, for more than 30 years, the last 15 as airport director. First, I want to say thank you to the leaders and members of the Transportation Committee for developing and passing meaningful bipartisan FAA reauthorization legislation through the House. Chairman Graves and Ranking Members Larson and Cohen deserve immense credit for their leadership. The overwhelming votes in committee and on the House floor are a testament to the strong consensus that exists for this important legislation. For airports, the House bill increases federal investment after decades of static, authorized funding levels and makes important programmatic changes. These investments will fund improvements from tarmacs to terminals, enhancing safety, modernizing airport facilities, and increasing capacity while reducing environmental impacts. With safety concerns on the forefront, I want to emphasize that additional AIP resources will help airports upgrade runways, taxiways, and lighting to mitigate runway incursions and enhance safety. These investments on the ground complement efforts in the bill to enhance capabilities in the skies by adding to the controller workforce and upgrading technology. Both are important and extremely necessary. We also appreciate your work to reduce red tape, promote small community air service, improve the contract tower program, expand the aviation workforce, and protect the environment. Airport executives are encouraged by the action that the committee has taken, but we are concerned about the looming December 31st deadline for enacting a long-term FAA bill. The nation's aviation system is too important to leave on autopilot or to interrupt funding and unnecessarily increase costs. The challenges that the current uncertainty creates are evident at my airport and others with limited construction seasons and tight operational windows to complete projects. In Portland, we need to commence projects in early spring and complete them by the end of September. Even a small delay can postpone a project until the next construction season, since operationally we can't begin a project that won't be paved and ready for operation by the time paving plants close in the fall. This upcoming construction season is critical at Portland as we're reconstructing our taxiway Alpha, the parallel taxiway for our primary runway that moves aircraft from the runways to our terminal apron. The project must start on time. It has not only a tight seasonal weather schedule, but a tight operational schedule due to our extremely busy summer tourism season. Already, we are coordinating the project construction schedule with our airline partners, which must adjust their flight schedules and aircraft to accommodate the project. My taxiway project is an example of just one airport. It is not unique. There are many airports with similar critical airfield infrastructure projects that can't move forward without the certainty of funding availability. Ultimately, this means projects that improve system efficiency and safety could be deferred. Sadly, this is not the first time airports have been challenged by short-term extensions and continuing resolutions. I will be blunt. It is not cost-effective, practical, or in some cases even possible to construct a project based on funding uncertainty or based on arbitrary partial year allotments. It is hard to buy half an air rescue firefighting truck or use only half of our short construction season. Surprisingly, some of the largest expenses on our major airfield projects are startup costs, which amount to 15 to 20% of overall costs. Our contractors must have their equipment, safety, security, fencing, barriers, materials, and support facilities on site and ready to go before construction begins. If the project is delayed, forcing contractors to remobilize in the next construction season, the costs are doubled. When you multiply these impacts across hundreds of airports, the effects are significant. Increased costs, delayed or deferred projects, and numerous operational challenges. Mr. Chairman, the aviation industry is in a period of intense challenge and opportunity. We need long-term certainty to plan, prepare, and build projects that increase efficiency and enhance safety. Our passengers, users, and communities expect and deserve these necessary investments. We are grateful for your work toward that end and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradbury. Mr. Peterson, you now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Cohen, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for holding this hearing today on the importance of reauthorizing the FAA administration as quickly as possible. I'm Gary Peterson, Executive Director of the Transport Workers Union of America. Our members include over 155,000 transportation workers across the country. We're the largest union in the U.S. aviation industry, and we represent mechanics, flight attendants, ramp workers, dispatchers, fleet service workers, pilot simulator instructors, meteorologists, and others who safely deliver people and goods to their final destination every day. On behalf of the entire TW, I want to start by applauding the committee's diligent and collaborative efforts to pass H.R. 3935, the 2023 FAA reauthorization. Your legislation includes a number of historic provisions the TW has been advocating for over decades. Our union has strongly endorsed H.R. 3935, and we hope to see it swiftly enacted into law. The provisions of your legislation are not only historic, but urgently needed. Every day that the FAA continues to run on a short-term extension is another day that our members face assault, unsafe work conditions, and impossible economic conditions that are incentivizing companies to offshore good aviation maintenance jobs. Since the late 1980s, the FAA has outrageously encouraged airlines to perform their maintenance outside the United States by selectively enforcing safety regulations. Today, there are nearly 1,000 FAA certified repair stations abroad. It is at best disingenuous and more often an outright lie when airlines tell the FAA or the flying public that they maintain the highest maintenance standards. The truth is that no one has insight into the work performed at many of these facilities outside the U.S. There are no random inspections, no minimum qualifications for mechanics, and absolutely no expectation that the work is being done to U.S. standards. China has been the largest beneficiary of this lack of enforcement and now employs nearly 22,000 workers at facilities repairing and overhauling U.S. aircraft, roughly the same amount of aviation maintenance workers as the states of California and Texas combined. This is work that absolutely should be done on U.S. soil by qualified U.S. workers. H.R. 3935 would close these loopholes and reiterate existing FAA standards. Your legislation requires companies abroad that request the rights and privileges associated with an FAA certification also meet U.S. standards. This provision will return thousands of good jobs to the U.S. and raise the level of safety in our airspace. On this subcommittee, the TW particularly appreciates the work of Representatives Mark Molinaro and Julia Brownlee, who led this fight on the issue in this Congress. Additionally, H.R. 3935 will save airline workers' lives. For customer-facing airline workers, violent and unruly passengers have become all too common. While the number of formally reported cases of unruly passengers has dropped since its peak in calendar year 2021, 2023 is on pace to record nearly 2,000 incidents of unruly behavior in our air system, a 63% increase over 2019. H.R. 3935 takes meaningful steps to end the threat of assault on airline workers, including updates to employer assault prevention and response plans. Although the bill could take stronger action in preventing these assaults, there is no doubt that the legislation will reduce the number and severity of assaults on ground workers and flight attendants. The situation on airport ramps is even more dire. Early this year, the TW mourned the tragic loss of Michael Ingram, an American Airlines ramp worker who was crushed by a malfunctioning ramp service vehicle that pinned him to a jet bridge at Austin's Bergstrom International Airport. This tragedy was the result of a failure on all levels, including that of the FAA. Ramp workers like Michael are often invisible to the public. Sadly, 3 other ramp workers, have also died this year, in this past year alone, including one just this last month. It has been far too long since these rules keeping these workers safe have been reviewed and updated. H.R. 3935 mandates the FAA issue a call to action to review ramp worker safety procedures, bringing stakeholders to address longstanding deficiencies in FAA policy, update training programs, and increase visibility for safety markings. For ground workers, these changes cannot come soon enough. My written testimony details the many ways H.R. 3935 will immediately improve safety and worker rights in our airspace. I again applaud your work by directly tackling all of the major issues facing airline workers today It's significant that your legislation earned the unanimous vote of this full committee and an overwhelming vote on the House floor. Our members are proud to support the House version of the FAA reauthorization. Thank you again for holding this hearing, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following: a letter from members of the Federal Aviation Administration's Management Advisory Council in their personal capacity from November 27, 2023, a letter from Airlines for America, November 29, 2023, and a letter from Aerospace Industries Association from November 29 of this year. A letter from associations representing the general aviation industry from November 29 of this year. A letter from Reliable Robotics from November 30 this year. A letter from the American Society of Travel Advisors, and all supporting the timely passage of a long-term and comprehensive authorization.
Without objection, so ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I first want to recognize and thank both Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and Ranking Member Cohen for their leadership to get this bill not only through this committee, but allowing the process to go forward, the amendments. Mr. Bunce, you mentioned that watching the amendment process, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. And I want to give, I just want to say thanks to every one of you here, because your patience on this has been sitting on Schumer's desk for 5 months. You see the damage that's happening. As an airport director, you see what we can fix. And so it's frustrating that we have great leadership on this committee in a bipartisan fashion, pushing an important reauthorization bill, and the Senate sits on it for 5 months. Look how much farther we could have been ahead. That's why we have to change the way this town delivers legislation for the American people. We know that general aviation, commercial aviation, is only going to grow in the years to come. And I want to just, before I make my comments, thank you all for your leadership as well. Pushing us to make sure that the legislation fits the demands. And Mr. Peterson, I first want to thank you for talking about the workers, because this bill takes care of the workers above and below the wings, which are so important. They have to work together. So I want to thank you. In Minnesota, our local news organization, KSTP, recently reported on the shortage of airplane mechanics and technicians impacting the Minnesota aviation industry, particularly general aviation. In the House-passed FAA reauthorization bill, we tripled authorized funding for the FAA Section 625 Aviation Workforce Development Program. These aviation workforce development grants for aviation maintenance, technical worker support proposals that generate and increase interest and prepare students to pursue aviation maintenance careers. Mr. Bunce, what would this increased investment in Section 625 program mean to the general aviation industry?
Thank you, Representative Stauber. If you look at a facility like Cirrus that you have in district, and Mr. Bruchette also has Cirrus in his district, if you just take that, we have had competition so much for being able to get qualified workers into our factories. We all know what happened during the pandemic. We all know all industries are short. But if you look at then who we have to work with in the FAA, they've also had a great drain of resources. So what you have done in 625 is be able to not only emphasize the importance of pilots, and of course the pilot situation right now, we're building training aircraft. Both of the companies that I mentioned, or both of you see that we're putting a lot of training aircraft out. And because what we're paying pilots right now, this is starting to be solved. It won't happen overnight. But when you look at maintenance workers and factory workers in aerospace, we have a critical shortage. One of our companies forecasts for the next 20 years, almost 700,000 technicians is who we need out there. And of course, industry then competes with the FAA for that expertise. So we've got to build it both within the federal agency that regulates us and within our workforce. So we're very appreciative of what was included there.
Mr. Bunce, you mentioned Cirrus Aviation and their new facility I toured within the last month. I asked the question, if you could hire workers today in just this facility, They said they'd take 200 today. And that's all across the country. And so I appreciate your comments. Mr. Peterson, what other aspects of the House passed bill do you think will increase participation in the aviation workforce?
Yeah, so I would say that the bill obviously funds areas for the maintenance technicians that we've been looking for years. And this is an area that's been lacking as work's gone overseas. And unfortunately, that's where the development's gone to. So the investment in our U.S. workforce and getting students and educating them on why they want to enter the career field is critical. I was young when I decided to go into this career field, realized this is what I wanted to do. But the schools that were out there when I was growing up are no longer there, and similar to other trades. Reinvesting in this type of work and in our younger generation to do this work is critical. And it's critical across all the aerospace fields, whether it be manufacturing, air traffic control, maintenance technicians, pilots, all of us it's born into your system. And again, it's having the accessibility, which has been diminished recently. And I would say over the last 15 years, putting the investment back into our workers is what's critical for the future.
Thank you very much, and my time is up. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bradbury, firstly, I'd like to say I read your resume and I'm impressed with what you've done to bring the Portland, Maine airport up to snuff and in a green fashion. Our FAA bill proposes significant increases in annual airport improvement program funding. How will these funding increases benefit commercial services and general aviation airports, and in what ways do they address the infrastructure needs outlined in the FAA's National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems?
It really is critical. I mean, what we have seen is the flat funding with AIP has really caused us to $13 billion a year is what the program has. There's $30 billion of needs. This is a huge step in getting that infrastructure built. For us personally, additional discretionary will come forward to help with our important safety projects. As I mentioned in my oral remarks, our Taxiway Alpha is a huge and important safety program for the airport. Not just Portland, but across the country. Really, airports are really thankful and appreciative of this change after 20 years in increased funding for AIP.
Our bill also includes changes in the AIP formula, such as reducing the PFC turnback for large and medium hub airports. How do these proposed formula changes contribute to fair and efficient distribution of federal funds among airports, and what impact might they have on the infrastructure improvements and safety measures at different sized airports?
Certainly, safety is important on the ground just as it is in the air, and it's critical that we have the needed funding. The PFC hasn't increased in years, so making it that our medium and large hubs can use more of the AIP funds is critical. The additional funding is really funding more projects. At the end of the day, that's the reality. It increases the amount of funding for aviation safety on the ground. And aviation safety on the ground is getting that infrastructure built and in place. Hugely critical.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Peterson, in addressing the issue of assault on airline workers, what steps or action items has the Transportation Workers Union put forth to update employer assault prevention and response plans, and what specific provisions does our bill include to mitigate the threats faced by customer-facing airline workers?
Yeah, again, developing a task force that involves labor and management together to look at those critical areas. The bill provides for that. It also provides the opportunity for penalties to be announced if somebody assaults a worker and whatnot. And again, I think the addition of not just in the air but on the ground assaults at workers at airports has recently become even more critical. And I think these are all elements that need to be addressed, and they are addressed in the bill. But certainly having individuals know what the penalty can and will be, and a mechanism for that is addressed in the bill. What's not addressed in the bill is a no-fly list and some of the things that we would have liked to have seen. Maybe in the future those things will happen. Or what I think more importantly is the bill addresses a way to diminish what's happening, bring that temperature down, and bringing that temperature down will hopefully solve a lot of the issues that we're facing today.
Thank you, and thank you for all the members of your union who do so much to make our flying much more safe and convenient. Mr. Bunch, Colonel, Your statements about the impact of delayed long-term FAA bill were quite compelling, especially the remarks made in reference to unleaded avgas. Since sustainability is a key topic within aviation currently, can you briefly explain GAMA's role in the Eliminate Aviation Gasoline-Leaded Emissions initiative and why the transition to unleaded fuel for piston engine aircraft is important for the environment?
So the EAGLE initiative, Eliminate Aviation Gas-Lead Emissions, is a very important one that brings together all of the general aviation associations along with the FAA to be able to work along with the EPA, which recently released its endangerment finding, to all work on a solution together. And I'm very proud to report that we just had a press release earlier this week that success has been achieved with the Piston Aviation Fuel Initiative, with one of the companies that's going through that testing, which we do up at the FAA Tech Center, to be able to check the endurance of the fuel that they're offering, the unleaded fuel that they're offering, to be able to go and solve this problem. There is such a strong commitment, and the support from what we've seen from this committee not only will help work getting rid of the lead out of the avgas, but then also the work that this committee is doing on sustainable aviation fuel and trying to push that forward is absolutely critical. And we really appreciate the support so that turbine aviation, which the airlines use, and of course our turboprop aircraft and our business jets use, and our rotorcraft, is absolutely paramount to be able to achieve the goals that we as industry, both general aviation and civil aviation, have set to be net zero by 2050.
Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. The other gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate my colleague from Tennessee, Congressman Cohen. Yesterday, I was talking to some young students, college students, a group of Jewish folks, and I was talking to them about Israel, of course, but I invited them into my office, and one of them actually was, he pointed out a Cirrus aircraft that was on, a model of it that was on my desk, and that he actually flew one of those, and I thought that was pretty cool, and I appreciate you mentioning that. We're very proud of that in our district, and I apologize, I'm wearing a coat. I'm a little cold. Pete Stauber, he was basically in shirt sleeves over here burning up, and of course, he's from Minnesota, so I guess that tells you why, and I'm from Tennessee, so I'm just a little cold over here. But Mr. Bunce, what role does our industry play in implementing the FAA reauthorization?
We work very closely with the FAA. I think people realize, obviously Mr. Santa's controllers do a phenomenal job of keeping us safe and everything, but we have routine interactions with the FAA all the time in the certification and flight standards area. So that part of the FAA is very critical to us, and that part of the FAA is the one that's had a tremendous drain in mid-level management and also younger people. Industry competes on wages, and a lot of people have just simply left for the private sector. And so it is of paramount importance to us that those technicians that we work with are trained properly, are back in the office so that they can collaborate together, and those older heads that are still there can train that younger workforce to be able to work with a sector where technology is progressing so rapidly. And the only way we'll be able to keep up, and our regulatory authorities can be able to remain the gold standard for aviation across the planet, is to be able to have that training and that working in the office together.
On that same track, what do you think the best way for Congress, for us to work with industry on that implementation?
I think what you've done also with workforce development, but also, the FAA responds very strongly to questions from Congress and pressure. And really, as each one of these reauthorizations go through the process, you require some rulemaking that's done. A lot of us in industry come to you to ask for that rulemaking because things aren't happening fast enough. So having the FAA report to you on some metrics, just an ability to see how quickly they process all of the work that has to be done. There's got to be some type of accountability, especially within the certification workforce, that they provide industry answers to things like issue papers that we often are required to put forward, and they just go back and forth within the bureaucracy, and we don't get an answer. And any answer is better than no answer. If they say no, we try to figure out how to go ahead and give them a new approach to be able to have a positive answer. This is important.
Let me ask you, will the reauthorization, will it help support the private sector innovation?
Absolutely. There's a lot of emphasis that you all put in technology here. And when we look at advanced air mobility, when we look at unmanned aircraft systems, technology will provide some answers that help provide to Mr. Santa's workforce some new technology out there, new methods to be able to go and have the situational awareness to be able to handle the increased amount of vehicles we are going to put into the airspace. And so being able to address the significant workforce issues that we have, coupled with providing the technology both to pilots in the air, those that control unmanned aircraft systems, and also providing Mr. Santa's workforce with new technology will help us maintain the safety that we've come to know and appreciate.
Thank you. Mr. Bradbury, can you provide us some examples of some unnecessary red tape that the FAA reauthorization should address? I know Mr. Bruce mentioned things back and forth.
Certainly, there's been a couple circumstances where Congress has set forth on land that was purchased or procured with airport funds, and being able to use that and put it into exceptional and market use. That's been a slower process than anticipated, and I think misinterpreted by the FAA Congress intent. So that's just one example of that we've seen that we're expecting improvement on with this bill.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, yield the rest of my time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Burchett. Recognize the gentleman from Washington, ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In hearing our discussion and hearing your testimony, I'm struck by a line Stephen Colbert used on his first show when he asked people, you name a president, say great president or greatest president. And the FAA bill, is it a great bill or is it the greatest bill? Frankly, it's the greatest. And we need to see some movement on it in the Senate. And I think your testimony outlines that. Mr. Santa, though, this month on the safety review team, which is this independent crowd, published its report on assessing risks. More than half of its recommendations, 13 out of 24 recommendations, specifically focused on air traffic controllers staffing and training. Can you yourself elaborate a little bit on the SRT's findings with regards to staffing and training, please, for us?
Yes, thank you for the question. That report exemplifies precisely the problems we've had for the past 10 or 15 years. FAA Finance has a staffing model that has attrited our workforce to unsustainable levels. We want to work the new entrants. We want to service general aviation, cargo, commercial traffic, anything that comes. We're the professional air traffic controllers, and we love aviation, we love this industry, but with the current staffing levels, capacity is reduced. It is not sustainable to maintain FAA Finance's report in the Controller Workforce Plan. That's why it's so essential that your bill has the new tested, transparent, traceable, collaborative resource work group numbers as the plan for the Controller Workforce Plan. That will ultimately bring transparency and understanding to the health of our air traffic control facility staffing, which is abysmal right now. 6-day work weeks and 10-hour days are not sustainable. One-man sectors are not sustainable. We need more people in our facilities with the maximum hiring for the duration of the bill. That will help us tremendously. Thank you.
Do you have some insight on what the Senate is considering?
I don't have any insight, but working with them, we would like precisely what is written in the House bill.
Probably no disagreement up here. Mr. Peterson, the aviation workforce as well continues to face some challenges, and ranging from workplace conditions, concerns over workplace conditions, to whether workers are guaranteed the proper training and compensation. What are some major challenges facing your members? And can you remind us what our bill did about that?
I think one of the key components of the bill is all the investment in training. recurrent training and current training, the investment in the future for maintenance technicians, training in the area of, I know we talked a little bit about the wheelchairs, right? Handling wheelchairs. The ability to handle a wheelchair sounds simple, except for how do you get it from the level of the aircraft down to the ground level. The infrastructure at the airports isn't necessarily in place. That gets addressed in the bill. The training for folks on how to move those wheelchairs gets addressed in the bill. Again, there's some investment in training for flight attendants for self-defense and those types of things. What I can say is my view of what's in this bill, and this body has done a great job of addressing things that we've been talking about as the workforce for years, and it hits on all those. So, I mean, I could go through step by step, but you guys have hit on all marks, and that's why this bill's so critical in getting it done.
Do you have any insights on what the Senate bill, Senate discussion is?
I do not.
Does anyone have any insight on what the Senate's doing? Sorry. That's good enough for me. I appreciate it, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Recognize gentleman from South Dakota, Rusty Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. I love the topic of this hearing because I do think it is worth reminding this town loves to languish, right? We make progress and then it seems like inertia grinds us to a halt. But this committee got an impressive bipartisan work product done on time. And again, I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for that. It was a pretty impressive package, as has been alluded to a number of times. It had major provisions that accomplished the major priorities that our leadership talked about. I do want to highlight quickly a few of the things that I fought for. First off, encouraging the FAA to develop a digital, cloud-based, interactive platform to speed environmental review so we can get more of these infrastructure projects done in a timely manner. An increase to the general aviation non-primary entitlement program, greater flexibility on the airport improvement program funding, and then common sense reforms to the essential air service. We of course needed some reforms. We also want to make sure that while we were enacting those reforms, we protected rural airports in places like Watertown, Aberdeen, and Pierre in South Dakota. This committee has done its work. And I think it is time for us to continue to amp up the pressure so that Washington can stop with the languishing of this long-term aviation reauthorization. A few questions for our panelists. First off, Mr. Santa, talk to us a little bit about the value of the contract tower program to our national air system. And then give us some sense if we don't get a long-term reauthorization, if there are any threats to airports.
Well, there's hundreds of communities serviced by the federal contract program. They're generally smaller airports that serve mostly general aviation, and they are valuable. We have controllers and facilities and fields that generally wouldn't get that level of service due to that program. That program is always up for debate when reauth lapses, and I think it would be a difficult pill to swallow, losing those facilities temporarily due to a lapse of reauthorization. Other than that, I know that in this bill there is an evaluation of some of the facilities. As I said before, 10-year staffing models, it's a lifetime in this industry that changes every single day. So evaluating those to recapture some of the highest capacity facilities does make a lot of sense, and it is included in the bill.
And then for Mr. Bradbury, you heard me talk about essential air service. I think it's an incredibly important provision to make sure that our country is connected in the same way that interstate highways go through rural areas as well. Talk to us about the impact to those most rural airports if we don't have a long-term reauthorization soon.
Certainly, I can speak right from Maine. Maine is a large rural state, and essential air service plays an important part in connecting a large rural state to the national air transportation system, not only the national air transportation system, but the worldwide air transportation system. Critical. We have essential air service at Presque Isle. We have essential air service in Augusta, Maine. And Portland, Maine is a small hub, but it is a critical. That's just two examples for what becomes part of the national air transportation system.
But if we don't have essential air service, or if there isn't the predictability of a 5-year reauthorization, does that put any particular stress or uncertainty onto these rural communities?
I believe it does. I certainly believe it does. In my talking with those other airport managers in the state, it is a concern, no question. I mean, we need reauthorization to keep these programs going.
I also talked about speeding environmental review. Give us some sense of how that might benefit airports that I know a lot of them have a number of infrastructure projects they'd like to get done over the course of the next few years.
Certainly. I mean, every project, it is a long process to get through some of the environmental review. And sometimes it's even, when you miss some certain deadlines in that process, it can set a whole project back. We ultimately get there, but every time we can speed that up and have the same result, it's huge. It's really just about efficiency and keeping costs lower, part of that efficiency.
I mean, do you have a quick horror story? I mean, what's the longest that you heard of a project going from, bid letting to completion and maybe slowdowns because of environmental review?
Yeah, I do have a horror story. It was an incident take plan, but it was with just investigations and SCAD from a rabbit. Held up a project indefinitely until we could get that all worked out with Inland Fish and Wildlife. We were at the northern extreme boundary of of a certain type of rabbit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Georgia, the other Mr. Johnson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. In today's political climate, it's not often that Americans see colleagues on both sides of the aisle on any particular committee come together in a unified way to get anything done. But that is exactly what happened when this committee voted 63-0 back in July to pass the FAA reauthorization bill out of committee, a bill that required a four corners agreement to ensure that both sides came to the table for the benefit of our constituents, but most importantly for the American people as a whole. A few of my priorities as we crafted this legislation were combating aircraft noise, strengthening aviation safety, diversifying the workforce, and enhancing the air travel experience for both passengers and workers. All of which I can say this bill does a good job of addressing. I was extremely proud to see the Willa Brown Aviation Education Program to support outreach and educational opportunities in underrepresented communities included. This program would be instrumental in strengthening and diversifying the U.S. aviation workforce, with the overarching goal being to address the shortage of workers in the aviation industry. Mr. Santa, adequate staffing levels not only enhance the ability to manage increasingly complex airspace, but also mitigate the risk of fatigue-related errors, ultimately safeguarding the well-being of passengers and the integrity of global air transportation systems. Your testimony states that, quote, understaffing forces the FAA to assign mandatory overtime air traffic controllers, forces the FAA to assign mandatory overtime to air traffic controllers on a regular basis, end quote. What are the safety risks that this kind of work schedule creates for the national airspace system?
Well, thank you for the question. It's all exacerbated by the lack of staffing. When you're working 6-day work weeks and making thousands of decisions an hour on position, and none of them can be wrong. The margin of error is not 0.0001. You have to be 100% accurate because the safety of the passengers and the industry rely upon you. And working 6-day work weeks, 10-hour days, 200 hours a month, it's a strain, it's a stress, it is fatiguing. And to eliminate or to combat that, we need maximum hiring, and we need the controller workforce plan to have the basis of the CRWG numbers, precisely what your bill does.
Is it possible that controller fatigue may have played a role in any of the near-miss incidents over the past year?
Those instances are still under investigation, and we have party status with the NTSB, so I can't comment on those. But fatigue is a factor in the capacity of the system for sure. The
Yeah,
delays, go ahead.
Our air traffic controllers are only humans, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Your testimony also talks about the lasting impacts of extreme budget cuts, such as the across-the-board cuts from sequestration a decade ago. Can you elaborate on what impacts these Republican-induced budget squeezes, government shutdowns, and even the threat of lapsed funding, what that has had on controller hiring and the safety of our airspace system?
Absolutely. I think Mr. Bunce put it clearly. We need new technology. We need enhancements. And unfortunately, with the FAA budget request, we're in sustainment and fix on fail only. A few stats are ASDX, which is an essential tool for runway surface separation, will not be expanded to any new facilities. TFDM, which is an enhancement, was initially slated for 89 facilities. It's down to 32 sites because of funding issues. We have delayed enhancements to our legacy system, our radar systems, that will impact the future to be able to handle the increased traffic system-wide.
Mr. Bunce, you want to add a final comment to that?
It's not only some of the very expensive technology that Mr. Santa just pointed out just can't be funded, but also what you've done in this bill is encourage the ability for us to put the technology into lower cost solutions that actually provide great situational awareness. Right now, when both Rich and I are pilots, we all carry these in the cockpit. Well, there's technology out there right now where the controllers can send us a taxi path electronically, and young people that are new to flying in aviation, they're used to following a magenta line, just like they do in their automobiles. Well, we can transmit that magenta line to them. This thing talks to you to say if you stray from it, and it gives you warnings. We could put this out today, and it would enhance our surface awareness capability with other very low-cost solutions. And if we focus on that, we can provide the technology both on the ground and in the air that really helps in the safety regime.
Thank you. I thank the chair for his indulgence, and with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Owens for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Cohen, and our distinguished guests and witnesses for taking the time to shine a light on the devastating consequences of failing to pass a long-term FAA reauthorization. While there's no shortage of crises in this body to address, few are more pressing than keeping airlines flying, passengers safe, flight crews on time, and air traffic control towers functional. Air travel has become increasingly painful for both passenger and crew alike. The fallout from no FAA reauthorization only perpetuates the diminishing trust Americans place in aviation infrastructure. We're in a position to help restore confidence in air travel, and I think I speak for this room. We all want to be a part of that solution. Congress owes it to nearly 3 million American passengers who travel every day to get this bill over the finish line. Mr. Brunch, in your testimony, you observed the industry is going through an era of development and innovation and technology that rivals the dawn of the jet age. Can you elaborate how this FAA reauthorization differs from those in the past and why this time the stakes are higher?
At this point in time, with technology moving as rapidly as it is, we have to have the FAA keep up. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to have the training available for them to be able to understand the new technology. The experts are out in industry. Our regulators need to be familiar with that technology to be able to properly regulate and do the safeguards that we all have seen over the last several years is a great emphasis to this Congress and the American people. And so as we look at this rapid innovation in technology, we've got to be smart on what electric technology does, because we're all looking, we were just talking about essential air service. We're going to be able to provide with advanced air mobility vehicles, not only the ones that fly vertically, what we call eVTOL, but some of the conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, an ability to be able to help with rural America and be able to provide that transportation to our hubs. And we also can use, our nation has an incredible network of airports that no other nation has, over 5,000 public use airports. Some of them have towers, some of them do not. But by allowing the technology to move forward, such as having remote towers and a capability to be able to network all of our facilities together, really provides us an ability to expand and allow these new entrants to come into the airspace safely.
Thank you. Mr. Bradbury, my brand-new hometown airport of Salt Lake City is currently in phase 2 of a 3-part, $5 billion development. Can you explain the impact of a delayed FAA reauthorization to Salt Lake City International and other airports undergoing modernization efforts?
Sure. I mean, the great thing of this bill is it's not just airside safety. It also will allow terminal enhancements and gives us some flexibility in funding those terminal improvements, which will enhance the passenger experience and the accessibility to our airports. So we really appreciate some of this thinking on the process in this bill and the AIP program.
Okay. And Mr. Santa, what benefits, now again, I just want to kind of reemphasize some comments you made earlier. I think everybody needs to hear this again. What benefits could the national airspace system realize if FAA addressed the air traffic control shortage? Could this improve operational tempos at airports or increase the amount of traffic that can be handled in the Northeast?
Yeah, capacity is immediately increased due to more than one person working the sector. More eyes at the sector allows higher capacity, better safety margins, better pilot reports and turbulent reports. It's a system that relies on more bodies to run higher intensity traffic in the Northeast corridor or in the Florida or in Las Vegas. We're stressed so far now by single sector operations that the limiting factor, you're missing your connections, you're missing your vacation destinations because capacity is reduced. So capacity is the biggest benefit of adequate staffing.
I also want to thank you, you guys here. I happen, again, living in Salt Lake City, probably one of the most innovative states in the union. And we're growing like crazy, and it's based on how we handle our infrastructure, not only Salt Lake City Airport, but Provo and beyond. So we really need to get this done with, because cities like ours need to make sure we can plan out in the future, and that's based on how well you guys can plan out and put things in place. So thank you so much for what you're doing. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope the strategy works by having this hearing today that will spur the Senate to act with haste. Mr. Peterson, thank you for mentioning Mr. Molinaro and my bill and your testimony, and I really do appreciate your work to ensure that aircraft are being maintained safely regardless of where in the world they happen to be repaired. Can you share some examples of concerning maintenance work your members have found on aircraft repaired outside of the United States?
Sure. Aircraft engine components held together with tape, wire, which is completely out of compliance. We found that as they've come back to the U.S. Aircraft painted with flammable and toxic paints. Damage repaired through a painting process, not doing the actual repair, but just painting over the top of it. Doors installed upside down and backwards. We've also experienced along the way, and this isn't just germane to the overhaul of the aircraft, but we've experienced guns, drugs, behind panels, hidden behind panels, whether it be in the wheel well, avionics bays, or even in the lavatories. It's a common thread that we find as these aircraft go into these heavy maintenance facilities. Accessibility, as a passenger, you see the outside of the aircraft, you know, the cabin and whatnot. As a maintenance technician, we see behind those panels. Most of those panels don't get opened unless there's something wrong. So it's very easy to do things and put things in places that don't get accessed for many months or even years at a time. And this is a concern that we have, obviously, with foreign facilities and access to aircraft. This is one of the reasons why the FAA and their ability to oversee and look at these facilities like they do U.S. facilities. I'll give you a prime example, China. I don't know that an inspector has been in China in years. They were doing inspections by video. If they want to come on our property in the US, they walk in and they can ask me any question they want. In China, they need 6 months' notice to go visit a facility. That's insane. And the standards are so different that, you know, we're held to this standard, they're held to that standard. We need to be held to the same standard, and I'm proud of the standards we have here. And that's why, you know, I'm passionate about the bill, I'm passionate about the work that you guys have put forward. Those are just some prime examples.
So are the airlines returning work to the United States after they're aware of these instances?
No, they just move it around, to be fair. We do a lot of rework. We get airplanes back that are not in flying condition, and we wind up redoing a lot of the work in the US to put it back in a flying state. Not the full check, but pieces of that check. So again, the standards aren't the same. Who's doing the aircraft maintenance, working on the aircraft, is absolutely not the same. And unfortunately, we wind up doing a lot of repairs on other people's work. We've been blessed not to have an accident, and I hope that never happens, but eyes on these aircraft need to change.
Well, having a blessing is not really the right policy, but is the FAA taking any action under its existing authority to enforce some of these safety rules?
Well, the FAA's had, I'll just use the drug and alcohol piece of this. The FAA, that legislation was passed in 2012, I believe, and it's sad and hasn't been acted upon. I'm proud that that's addressed in this bill, and it will move forward. The Office of Management and Budget has moved that forward now. That's a prime example of, we have drug and alcohol testing for our folks. They don't have drug and alcohol testing. Well, if it's not necessary, then why are we doing it? And let me say this, it's absolutely necessary. It is fundamental to what we do. We all understand that.
Thank you, sir, very, very much. I don't have much time left, but Mr. Bradbury, I wanted to ask you, I've done some work around sustainable aviation fuel, and you know, from your perspective, what can Congress do to, in this upcoming FAA reauthorization, to really help airports develop SAF fueling infrastructure to increase the supply and provide cleaner fuel?
The FAST grants are a good start, and we appreciate that this reauthorization will keep that kind of work moving. We've submitted for one in the Northeast region through Boston to really look at the logistics and the delivery of SAF to the Northeast. So looking forward to it. It is important, and it is the way to really help on the carbon footprint of the aviation system.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I would like to thank our chair as well as our ranking member for their work on this FAA reauthorization, and I'm hopeful that we'll get this across the finish line soon. It was 142 days ago that this committee unanimously passed its FAA reauthorization bill after a robust, open, transparent, and bipartisan markup. 133 days ago, the House passed this bill 351 to 69 after, again, a robust, open, transparent, bipartisan floor process. It's good to finally see some green shoots from our Senate colleagues. I hope this means that we can get back to work on a final bill very soon. But as we eagerly await that, I commend the chairman for convening this hearing to highlight some of the important things that an FAA reauthorization means for all users of our national airspace. It's things like ensuring our gold standard of aviation safety, strengthening the general aviation community, increasing funding and flexibility for airport infrastructure, addressing the pilot shortage, and facilitating the future of aviation with firm timelines for the FAA to finally issue a beyond visual line of sight rulemaking for unmanned aircraft systems, as well as final interim regulations for advanced air mobility systems. There are these and so many more provisions that will help propel our aviation industry forward in the next 5 years. Mr. Bunce, your testimony mentions the importance of facilitating more timely, transparent, and accountable promulgation of rulemaking policy, guidance, and related materials. Can you explain why the rulemaking process is so critical to getting aviation innovation to the marketplace and how HR 3935 addresses these challenges?
Sir, our industry is very unique. We really can't do anything without a rule. So if you have a very laborious rulemaking process that takes years and years, what happens is it doesn't keep pace with technology, but it also allows for other authorities outside the U.S. to be able to lead in aviation rulemaking. So let me give you a few examples. I mean, we were looking at the cybersecurity rule. Pretty darn important to be able to address cyber in this day and age. It's been languishing. We look at what's called SMS, Safety Management Systems Rule. We have a critical rule that's very in front of us right now that impacts advanced air mobility, which is, we refer to it as the SFAR, and is Special Federal Aviation rulemaking process. And if we don't get this right, we will not lead the world in advanced air mobility. You mentioned BVLOS, Beyond Visual Line of Sight Operations. We're primed to do that, and I'm very happy to report that the differences between the traditional manned aviation community that operates down in low altitude a lot to a lot of our airfields, our helicopter fleets and that, now that these companies are being able to equip with what we call detect and avoid technology, a lot of that impasse now is melted away, and it's time for the FAA to start moving to get BVLOS across the goal line. But if it takes years and years, one of the other problems is we don't let other authorities, when we go into what we call ex parte, to participate in collaborative rulemaking. That's just crazy. When you have a rule that takes 3 years long, to not allow them, when comments come in and they adjudicate those comments, to then go and coordinate with somebody like EASA, the European Safety Agency, is crazy.
Thank you. As a part of this FAA reauthorization, I was proud to have a bipartisan amendment that I co-led with my colleague from Nevada, Ms. Titus, included in this bill. It was a simple amendment that requires the FAA to set its air traffic controller hiring target at the maximum number that can be trained at the FAA Academy through all 5 years of the reauthorization. Mr. Santa, you've talked about the challenges facing the air traffic controller workforce, but can you talk a little bit more about the importance of this specific provision in the context of the overall bill?
Well, personally, I want to thank you for that amendment. It will pay huge dividends for the air traffic controllers having maximum hire for 5 years. As you heard, even maximum hiring for 5 years results in understaffed facilities. If we don't pass this bill and the FAA Academy closes and the hiring is suspended, we will be set back even farther. But maximum hiring for the duration of the bill will start, along with the Collaborative Resource Work Group being the basis for the Controller Workforce Plan, will start the healing of our facilities and the increasing of the staffing in 313 facilities across the NAS.
Thank you, Mr. Santa. I yield back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you to each of the witnesses for being here today. The committee has worked hard to craft a strong, proactive, and bipartisan 5-year Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill and send it to the House floor where it passed overwhelmingly. We did our job. But in the 4 months since, the Senate hasn't even held a committee vote on this critical bill. And because they couldn't meet their original deadline, the FAA is operating under a short-term extension that expires on New Year's Eve, 4 short weeks away. We need to keep our skies safe and our planes moving, in part so people can see their friends and family, but also because aviation is a key part of our national and international economy. Arizona's aviation economy supports nearly 19,000 jobs and contributes billions to the state and the country. Look, we have the safest and most efficient aviation system in the world. This Thanksgiving was one of the busiest travel days ever, and the women and men who staff our airports, airlines, and air traffic control towers deserve credit for keeping things running smoothly, as all airport workers did as well. But one of the issues I hear about most often is aviation workforce shortages, particularly our traffic controllers. And overworked, understaffed air traffic control towers are one of the contributor factors leading to the rise in harrowing near misses at airports nationwide. Over the last year, there have been several near misses at Sky Harbor in Phoenix, one of the busiest airports in the world, at Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, one of the fastest growing commercial airports in the country. We just opened a brand new $30 million air traffic control tower, but staffing shortages have forced the airport to reduce operations at the tower by 4 hours per day. The House's FAA reauthorization, the one the Senate has yet to take action on, increases FAA hiring targets for air traffic controller, sets up workforce development programs to improve recruitment and retention, and sets up pilot program to convert tower staff by private companies, like at Phoenix Mesa Gateway, to be staffed by FAA controllers. It's not just airplane safety. Our bill also addresses passenger safety as well, particularly the safety of passengers with disabilities. Just last week, a video went viral showing ground personnel carelessly throwing a passenger's wheelchair down a ramp where it bumped off and bounced across the tarmac. And we have a video. People depend upon these devices to move around, to get to their jobs, to visit family and friends. These mobility devices are not inexpensive. They can range up to tens of thousands of dollars. And there needs to be oversight on this carelessness, and I stand ready to work with my colleagues here and with the Department of Transportation to ensure everyone feels safe and able to travel. Our House-passed FAA bill takes meaningful common sense steps, many that I was proud to lead on, to improve the flying experience for passengers with disabilities. My ADAPT Act, Wheelchairs on Airplanes Act, and Mobility Aids on Board Improve Lives and Empower All Act, the Mobile Act, were included in the House-passed bill so that passengers with mobility issues can have proper accommodations, from boarding to seating and everything in between. I think I speak for all of us here when I say that we'll keep working to get this bill across the finish line. Our economy and the safety of the flying public depends on that. And we need our colleagues in the Senate to be better partners. Mr. Santa, I want to build on my colleagues' comments and questions on how to better our air traffic controller workforce to keep our skies safe. The Safety Review Team report, an independent panel commissioned by the FAA to look at near misses, specifically talks about how the plan to replenish the workforce is dated and, frankly, unrealistic. Specifically, when accounting for retirements and other attrition, the current plan reduces, quote, a negligible improvement over today's understaffed levels, unquote, to the tune of less than 200 additional controllers on the job by 2032. I have two questions. First, how can we attract more people to be air traffic controllers? And second, if we can't, what does this mean for the chances of more near misses or even the possibility of collisions at airports? Thank you. And then after the question, I'll yield back to the chair.
Attracting people to the profession hasn't been historically difficult. On a bid, we'll get upwards of 10,000 applicants. The problem is the hiring process. FAA Finance does not feel that we're understaffed. That's just frank. The controller workforce plan that they've presented to you this year actually reduces our numbers. This is a small workforce. We have 1,000 less certified professional controllers than we have a decade ago. We only have 10,700 controllers. Removing 10 to 12% of that, it's not sustainable. So getting people to apply generally isn't the problem. Moving it from the failed FAA Finance model to what is in your bill is a major solution.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think there's been one common theme that I've heard over and over and over, and that's modernizing and modernization. And it's true. And it's not just in aviation, but it's in the entire federal government. And I don't think it can be said enough, Mr. Chairman, and we need to say it over and over and over again, that yes, this committee unanimously passed a great bill, and it passed the House overwhelmingly. But y'all, I don't know what's going on in the Senate. I mean, they must have one whale of a pickleball tournament going on over there, because they certainly aren't getting anything done. I mean, they got bills stacking up everywhere. And if I seems frustrated, yeah, I'm a little frustrated, because I actually had an amendment in the FAA reauthorization too that studies hypersonics and getting incorporated into the national airspace. And this amendment addresses a number of things. We can't say enough. Workforce provisions, airport improvements, policies to help our general aviation community. So, Mr. Bunce, the Senate's delay in passing this reauthorization bill, what FAA modernization provisions are most pressing and need to get done now? And I know you've said it, but I think it just needs to be said over and over again.
To be able to keep pace with technology, the FAA has to have a nimbleness in its rulemaking. By bringing an associate administrator for rulemaking that this bill does, elevates the importance of being able to get rules, policy, and guidance out. We think that's very important, and I think the Senate has similar provisions that are able to support that. Likewise, what the House bill has done is also create a deputy administrator for safety and operations. I think that's extremely critical because, you know, when we have a change in administration or we have FAA administrators that finish their term, we need that continuity and stability to be in place, to be able to go and keep all of the metrics that are required by all of the different parts of the FAA to be able to come humming along and not have to reinvent the wheel every time we have a new administrator and deputy administrator. And then the emphasis that we have on technology there and the training of the workforce is so vitally important. We've got to be able to have a workforce that's able to understand the technology and to be able to certify it. And that certification delays and everything puts us behind. If we're talking about hypersonics, which we all support, is that is a holy grail to be able to get there. We've got to be able to do also supersonics, but the rigor that is required and the expertise that is not resident in the FAA right now would make certifying that type of technology extremely difficult. And this bill helps address that.
I appreciate it. Mr. Bradbury, Hartsville, Jackson International, world's busiest airport. Right now, they got a multi-billion-dollar modernization project going on that's going to help improve efficiency and customer service. How's delaying this enactment, the FAA, going to affect those projects?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of that.
How's the delay going to affect those projects?
Oh, it's critical, and again, it's both operational and for us, seasonal. So there are very tight construction schedules around the summer season for us that we have to get the work done. And if we don't have a reauthorization bill in its continuing resolutions, there's no guarantee that we will have the funding in place to get these really important projects underway and moving forward.
I agree with you 100%. I've been to the airport, been to the tower. Mr. Santa, I just want to finish up with a comment. I've been to TRACON in South Atlanta, met with the air traffic controllers, great people. A lot of them are veterans, very proud of what they do. But I'm going to tell you something. There's two things. NOTAM, yeah, it failed. It's a 30-year-old software, and instead of our FAA concentrating on improving that software, what'd they do? They spent tens of thousands of dollars to write a 179-page ruling to change it from notice to airmen to notice to air missions, and it certainly didn't make it any safer because it failed. And the other thing I'd like to say is the fact that we have an FAA that is more focused on hiring people based on DEI and wokeness instead of qualifications is one of the main reasons that you're seeing a lot of your air traffic controllers retire or quit, because they don't want to be responsible when someone comes in and something drastic happens, because we have an FAA that's been led by Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who is totally unqualified, has no idea what he's doing, and is pushing nothing but a socialistic experiment on an industry that he doesn't know anything about. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I recognize the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Davids, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Garrett Graves, and to Ranking Member Cohen for holding this hearing today. And thank you also to Chairman Sam Graves and Ranking Member Larson for their leadership on passing a common sense reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration in the House. Like many across the country, my holiday travel last year was impacted by some of the widespread flight delays and cancellations that we saw. And while our country's skies are absolutely the safest in the world, due to the hard work of our pilots and air traffic controllers, flight attendants, ground crews, and more, we have seen a troubling uptick in the near collisions at airports in our country. And these kinds of disruptions have become far too frequent, costing travelers both time and money. And this year, House Republicans and Democrats came together without theatrics to pass a bipartisan piece of legislation to reauthorize the FAA. The bill contains provisions that are going to have a huge impact on our flying experience as well as the economy. not just in my district, but across the country. And as a member of this committee, I've been working hard to ensure that the voices of the constituents in my district in Kansas are heard during this process. And while I was glad that the measures to protect Kansans' financial security and safety and to boost domestic manufacturers made it into the final bill, the reauthorization that we passed here hasn't been taken up by the Senate, which we've heard from multiple of my colleagues. The reauthorization we passed included consumer protections that require airlines to reimburse passengers for unexpected meal and hotel costs, and to establish policies allowing passengers to sit next to their young children. It also contains improved safety standards for air travel to help decrease airport near collisions, to review airplane emergency medical kits, evacuation procedures, and improve cabin air quality. And also, we saw the reauthorization in a bipartisan way uplift our local aviation workforce, boost domestic manufacturing, which is especially important in my state of Kansas, where we have a really strong legacy of aviation. And finally, this bill is going to improve and promote hiring of more air traffic controllers, strengthen the talent pipeline for pilots, maintenance technicians, and aviation manufacturing workers. And all of this is good stuff. There are, of course, pieces of the legislation that I disagree with. I'm sure there are pieces of the legislation that my colleagues disagree with, but the nature of coming together in a bipartisan way requires that we figure out how to get that done. And we all understand the benefits of a strong system to ensure that our economy continues to move forward. Passage of the FAA bill is exactly how our federal government should be operating. We saw that here in this committee, people from both parties coming together to find solutions to some of the most pressing issues that we're facing as a country. Pragmatism, compromise, these are things that make this work possible, and we have gotten to see that here. I really hope that the Senate will consider the version of the FAA reauthorization that we have put forward, and I will look forward to working on a final compromise with what they do end up getting done. Mr. Bunce, I do want to chat with you for a moment about the FAA reauthorization that we passed and the provisions that focus on strengthening the safety workforce, improving the agency's rulemaking, which I've heard from you about today even. And I would love to hear a bit more about the provisions in the House version of the bill that you see as improving the industry's safety and competitiveness in this increasingly competitive global market that we're in.
Well, thank you, Ms. Davids. First of all, also thank you for your emphasis on advanced air mobility, things like mobile clearances that's going to be able to facilitate the ability to get these vehicles into the airspace. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the rulemaking itself, policy and guidance, needs to be more nimble and streamlined because we are losing our edge in the world environment when other authorities can be able to promulgate rulemaking much faster. We all know we have to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act, but we've got to be able to audit our processes, be able to look at it and look at what other federal agencies do to be able to have more nimble rulemaking to get through the process. Sometimes it's taking 5-6 years, and the advanced rulemaking just sits on the shelf while other countries take what was done and be able to apply it. So that and the emphasis on technology and on workforce, all of the things that have been mentioned in this hearing so far are so critical to maintain our safety and to be able to improve as we put more vehicles into the airspace.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today and emphasizing the importance of this work. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Davids. I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in strong support of passing a comprehensive and long-term FAA reauthorization. In the House bill, we have secured a number of big wins for the United States of America. I'm most proud to say that our bill makes the William J. Hughes Technical Center permanently located in southern New Jersey and more specifically dedicated to advanced aerospace. The newly named FAA Technical Center for Advanced Aerospace will provide steady jobs and, most importantly, an opportunity for technical advancement aimed at bettering the safety and the capabilities of air travel. It's important. Also important is the amendment that will improve the protections for people with disabilities in our travel industry. The air travel experience should be a pleasant and safe one for everyone, for all people. So ensuring quality access is of utmost importance. American aviation today faces numerous problems ranging from air traffic controller shortages, safety issues with documented near misses of aircraft, a rising number of cancellations, and our inability to keep up with advancing technology. Staffing shortages are plaguing aviation. This not only has determined detrimental impacts on our economy and the labor workforce, but the safety capabilities of our aviation industry. This is serious stuff. Specifically relating to the staffing shortages, Mr. Santa, and I have to digress for a minute. I love your name, man. Santa. It's perfect for this time of year. You're just too skinny. Do you ever have fun with it?
Never, ever.
Never? We'll see. Okay, I am right now. If I were you, I would. But anyhow, I got to get on. These questions are for you. What are the safety implications of the staffing shortages, and what can be done to ensure that safety isn't further affected?
As I've said numerous times before, safety is our priority. No matter what the staffing at the facility levels are, no matter how critically staffed we are, and no matter what plan the FAA Finance puts out to reduce our numbers, safety is our priority. We're proud of it. We're professionals. We're dedicated to our skills, and it takes a lifetime to learn how to become a good controller. You're continually getting better. So with that priority focus, the capacity is reduced, obviously. With single sector positions and with the increase in traffic by new users, general aviation's up, cargo is obviously up. The deficiency comes in, you just can't work that much traffic with the understaffed situations in our facilities. But safety is always a priority.
And we can't say it too many times. What role has FAA Finance played in the current controller staffing model? What's their role?
The biggest detriment is the staffing model that FAA Finance employs. They report to industry and to Congress a much healthier situation than is actually out there. Last year, they reported our facilities at 102% staffed by using erroneous and flawed information. Our facilities are not 102% staffed. They are critically staffed. We're thousands below even an old 10-year-old number and the new CRWG numbers that desperately need to be implemented. They've been jointly collaborated. The FAA's ATO and NACA collaborated on these numbers. The experts in the facilities collaborated and determined these numbers as what's needed to service the industry, service the traffic. And the FAA has refused to implement those, and that's why this bill is so important.
I appreciate your answers, and the bill is important, man. We got to get moving, not us. But we've heard that theme over and over and over today about the Senate. I hope they watch this hearing. If Congress doesn't pass a long-term funding solution to the FAA, America is at risk of losing its competitive edge in our tech race against China, which is real. Mr. Bunce, the aviation system continues to evolve daily, and important innovations are being made in the industry. From drones to advanced air mobility, the American aviation industry is moving fast, yet the government remains stuck in time. What are the ramifications for the advanced air mobility industry specifically if this FAA reauthorization legislation is not enacted in a timely manner?
Sir, if we look at the opportunity that advanced air mobility gives us, and again, a lot of emphasis is on the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, but it's also the electrification. If you think about a spinning turbine and the amount of electricity you can generate off of it, you can augment thrust. And I read with great interest COMAC, which is a government-supported program in China, just put forward a 19-passenger aircraft using that type of technology, the electric augmented thrust. And so what this bill gives direction to the FAA to be able to work with industry collaboratively on advancing these technologies. The Tech Center plays an incredible role. In fact, I hope that we after this bill is complete, we can get together industry and the government and be able to have also NASA bring in their long-term program to be able to, how they're supporting industry in advanced air mobility, and merge those programs more collaboratively, because there's a lot of great work that the Tech Center could do in conjunction with what NASA can do to help further this and keep our global leadership in place. We are an aerospace nation. We need to stay that way.
Thank you, and I want to thank Chairman Sam Graves, Ranking Member Cohen, Chairman Garrett Graves, and Ranking Member Larson, and this entire committee, and all of you. You've done good work on it. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Cohen, I hear y'all continuing to make reference to Mr. Santa and fun of his name during the holiday season, everything else. I'm really not sure what y'all were taught as kids. The last name is Claus. Just want to, for the record, make that clear. With that important clarification, Mr. Garcia, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Graves and the ranking member for this hearing. The House passed the FAA bill, which contains, of course, priorities that I was proud to advocate for, including a long overdue increase in AIP and workforce development funding and improved consumer protection measures. As my colleagues have stated, it is critical for the safety of the aviation industry and the American public to expeditiously pass a bipartisan FAA bill, but we cannot do so at the expense of our airport workers. Airport workers, many of them who are women, Latino, and Black, work grueling hours for poverty pay to keep our airports running, and they deserve better. That's why I introduced the Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, which would provide livable wages and benefits for these workers. Although not included in the House-passed bill, it's important to keep fighting for strong labor protections during future negotiations. This includes guarding against provisions that could unravel hard-won labor agreements, like a pilot retirement age increase. Mr. Peterson, can you talk about how bolstering airport worker wages and labor protections can benefit airports writ large?
Sure. So first, let me say that we support your legislation on the workers' wages. One of the things that we do see is a heavy turnover in the groups that you spoke about. They start working in the job and then they leave the job because other things become available. They're often lower paid than a lot of their peers in other industry. It's costly to get to the airport and things of that nature. So again, having legislation that provides workers with good pay, good benefits is critical. Obviously, our belief would be that if all of them join the union, we would fight for that. But with legislation like yours, getting that in place for sustainability is critical. And that's a baseline. Obviously, some areas beyond, in high-cost areas are already doing that. They have to do that because they just can't get anybody to come work there. So we absolutely appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your answer. In your written testimony, you mentioned that airlines are pressing Congress to present state and local labor laws that govern minimum wage, to preempt those laws, and they govern wage, meal, and rest breaks and family and sick leave, which builds on their local efforts to exclude airline workers from these laws. Why would excluding airline workers from the state and local labor laws be disastrous for the current and future generations of airline workers? And how does the House-passed bill reaffirm the right of states and localities to set higher labor standards?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to, if everybody that lives somewhere has a certain set of rules or laws that apply to them, to exclude airline workers, to me, seems preposterous because of the industry we work in. Granted that some people, and let me say this, airlines have been fighting this for a while and have not been successful in their litigation on that. But somebody that's a flight attendant, for example, saying, well, you live here, but the law doesn't apply to you because you're flying to another state. That's their job, or a pilot. Again, that is the issue at hand, is why would I stay in this industry? And taking a step back, let's just use as a flight attendant. Flight attendant field has become somewhat controversial. I talk to a lot of flight attendants today that say, I wouldn't want my son or daughter to become a flight attendant because of what they've seen happening in the industry recently. So taking away laws that everybody else has, if you're hearing that from the current flight attendants, and we don't represent pilots, but I'm sure there's a similar philosophy there, that if you're hearing that from flight attendants today, how do you get people to come into the industry if they can go work somewhere else and get the benefits of state laws that are in place? And so that's why this is critical.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Garcia. I'm going to yield to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bunce, in your testimony, you made reference to certification challenges in regard to technology. I met with a manufacturer this week that made similar references to some of the delays and inability to get important technology certified. You similarly made reference to the fact that the FAA is not actually in-house working, and our bill does attempt to address that. Have your members reported many experiences about delays or lack of capacity that is impacting the ability to implement or update technology that could bring greater efficiency, safety, and other improvements to the aviation sector?
Mr. Chairman, I hear about it every single day, and it's the one issue that frustrates and confounds my membership on a daily basis. If we don't have an efficient certification process and we have delay after delay, you're trying to develop new product. And what happens is, a lot of times, I had one of our major aviation companies say, Pete, I know I've got technology right out there right now that will not allow an aircraft to crash unless the engines are totally disabled. And yet he doesn't even move it forward because he said, I know I can't get it through the certification process in the amount of time that I can recoup the investment on engineering. So it is truly debilitating our workforce and our ability to advance technology when we can't get through the certification process. Let me give you another example. We validated a product coming from Europe on an aircraft, and the exact same, and it was a nacelle issue, the area that surrounds an engine. The same manufacturer provides the engine and nacelle for a U.S. product, but we did delay after delay and an unbelievable amount of testing when we already validated the product coming in from Europe. So not only do we have a problem with an inability to make decisions, but also we don't look at decisions that we've already made and say, okay, our foreign authorities certified that, now we've got the same manufacturer here, why are we going through a process that takes well over a year to look at the exact same thing?
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Colonel Bunce, if you have specific recommendations on particular parts of the certification, like policy office or others that you think would benefit from in-person work, I'd love to get that from you in writing. Mr. Santa, you discussed in your testimony at length the need to address the lack of capacity with air traffic controllers. Our bill does step in and attempt to address that, to force the FAA to hire more controllers and address the projected shortfalls in the FAA workforce, and requires assessment looking at future training as well. The FAA, as I noted in my opening statement, recently received a pretty jarring report from the SRT, the Safety Review Team, and there was a response to their recommendations stating that the agency is expanding the use of advanced training and beginning to deploy simulators for the use in controller curriculum to increase capacity and leverage benefits, putting controllers in specific facility environments sooner. What are your thoughts on the use of simulators to improve training or as adding capacity?
Anything that creates efficiencies is welcomed, but we cannot degrade standards or qualifications or certifications. It's a professional job that takes a lot of skill, and there's no substitute for working the traffic. That can never be explained away, or technology can replace that. But really, it's indicative of the bigger problem, masking the problem, not identifying that we have a staffing shortage and trying to explain it away by different options and different ideas, instead of adopting the CRWG numbers like this bill does and doing maximum hiring for the duration of this bill. Just a few days ago, they've agreed that maybe we can do maximum hiring for 3 years. It doesn't work. They're unwilling to move off of the FAA finance model, which has failed us.
Thank you. I know a number of members here have some tight timelines. I've got some more questions, but I'm going to submit them for the record for the other members of the panel. I do want to thank you all for being here. And with that, go to my friend from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I represent Las Vegas, and the airspace over my district is very busy and getting more crowded. You've got all of the commercial airlines coming into McCarran. This was our busiest month in October, almost 5.5 million. You've got all the private jets coming for the big events like F1 and the Super Bowl. They're using Henderson and North Las Vegas. You've got helicopters taking tours to the Grand Canyon. You've got Nellis Air Force Base, and you've got casinos using drones to deliver drinks by the pool. So it's everything. Now, I want to speak to you, Mr. Santa. It's distressing to say you have 1,000 fewer than you had 10 years ago, and you'll only have 200 more in 10 years from now. But we're getting more people in the skies. Can you just say one more time for the record how important it is to keep up with that demand and air traffic controllers?
Well, first of all, I want to personally thank you for your amendment. It will serve air traffic controllers well by maximum hiring. But Las Vegas is one of the hottest spots in the country. Their numbers being 10 years old, their staffing numbers, they have requested, they have put joint recommendations together. Their numbers are way too low. Yeah. The new CRWG numbers address that. The FAA is unwilling to completely adopt them and put them into the controller workforce plan. It is creating challenges, specifically at Las Vegas, among other facilities across the NAS. 10 years is a lifetime in this industry, and specifically for Vegas, as you said, with the F1 and with the F1 race.
Or international flights.
All the international flights, they did have some of the busiest traffic, and they're servicing that airport the best they can with critically understaffed measures.
What are your members doing to be, I hate the term, but proactive and encouraging ways to improve the situation, either airport improvements or all, instead of just reacting to an incident?
We have a lot of programs at SAP, which is a voluntary reporting to report issues before they become chronic. VSRP does a similar goal, and we're part of the solution. We're collaborative. We need NACA members. Are tasked, and they should be collaborative with all of the solutions at the facility. The major situation, specifically at Vegas and many of our facilities across the country, is critical staffing. We have tried to be collaborative, and we are. The FAA's ATO, the Air Traffic Organization, and NACA jointly developed new staffing numbers that were degraded by 10 years, and they will not be implemented by the FAA at this point.
Thank you. I'm going to ask any of you this. I know that the airline industry aviation generally is moving to more sustainable flights, and we need the infrastructure to support that. I saw where Virgin Atlantic just flew from London to JFK on totally green fuel. Can you talk about how that will not be able to move forward if we don't get this bill passed? Mr. Bunce or Mr. Bradbury, anybody?
I think the support that the bill gives to be able to keep the momentum going on sustainable aviation fuel, or on the piston side of the house, the eliminate avgas is very important. But also, if you look at the infrastructure improvements that we can make to airports, we've got a pilot program that you call for in the bill to be able to go and look at the electrification, because we're going to have to be able to charge a lot of these new vehicles, but also the ground vehicle infrastructure that we have at each one of our airports. So that's really forward thinking, and it's very critical in aviation. You know, we don't care on the auto side of that house or trucks about how really heavy batteries are, but it's all about weight for aviation. And you know, the incredible rotorcraft community that you have there at Las Vegas that allows Americans to go over our precious resource, the national parks, and that. We want to be able to move that forward. We can electrify the tail boom and reduce all the mechanical linkages of tail rotor in that by using the energy off the spinning turbine motors that are driving the main rotor shaft. Those types of things are facilitated by looking at that technology, and we're very appreciative of what's in the bill to help that.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, I would also point out how bipartisan this was. I worked with Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Yackham, well, he's gone, but anyway, Mr. Graves, on a number of these provisions, and I really hope to see them be enacted, because I think they are improvements to the system. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. And with that, I'd like to recognize my colleague from Florida, Mr. Bean.
A very good morning to you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Aviation Subcommittee. It's great to see you. You guys in the witness table have done an outstanding job. You have sold us. We're in. I've been here 11 months. Let me tell you what I've learned. I've learned that this committee is the most bipartisan committee, and there's agreement that we can do so much better. We're doing great now, but we can do so much better if we made changes. What if we had a bill that made changes and improved manufacturing and labor and the air traffic control and airports? We do. We just passed one. So what I've discovered, we are the choir. We are the choir. You're preaching on. Preach on, witnesses, and preach on, committee members. So I am all in. If anybody is keeping track, I think everybody has said we're all in. We need it because it's just an opportunity to make things better. My thought is, I know that they have very big desks in the Senate. Chuck Schumer's got a big desk, because I know somewhere on his desk is this FAA bill. Is it possible he just doesn't know it's there? Is that possible, that he just doesn't know? Is it possible he's just so busy? Does he realize how important air travel is? Maybe he takes the train. I don't know. But we got a big crowd here today. We got big committees. Maybe somebody here knows him personally, can poke him or give him a note to say, hey, have you looked on your desk? Because there is a bill that will definitely improve air travel and to make it safe. I've also discovered this. I've never flown as much as I have in the 11 months that I've been in Congress. And I now know, having toured the FAA Center in Jacksonville, which has we talked about how big Nevada is, but Florida and the corridor and the Space Coast and the weather present its own challenges. Everybody, when you're on a plane now, just know that there's somebody watching over you. There's an air traffic controller watching over you. And we just take it for granted that they're well rested and they're not overworked. And so I am grateful for them. We're just grateful that the airport's going to receive us and they're not going to be overworked or have the space, or the concrete's going to be just right and all the standards and workers and so many things. So if we don't pass this bill or if we extend it, we're missing an opportunity. We're missing an opportunity to go forward. My question to Mr. Santa is the contract program is a great program. This is the contract tower program. We got 262 small airports across the country participating in it. I've got several in my district, Cecil and Craig airports. If we don't pass it, if we just punt and not score the touchdown with it, how does that affect? What's our plan? What say you, Mr. Santa?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the support for JAX as well. That facility is in a critically staffed nature as well. It's critical to the East Coast traffic, and they're doing a phenomenal job with no resources. So thank you for that. FAA contract tower program services our smallest facilities, right? General aviation, busy facilities, flight schools. Mr. Bunce and I both are pilots, and we use those airports. My home airport is actually under the federal contract tower program. And with the reauthorization lapse, those programs are suspended. So the service and the safety that you would expect into those airports is lessened.
10-4. I'm almost out of time, but everybody here, if you're sitting out in the audience, you're part of the Aviation, T&I Aviation Subcommittee family. So together, maybe we can get the word to people with the big desks that have so much going on to say, let's take the one out that says FAA reauth and let's put that on the hot burner. Mr. Chairman, with my last little bit of time, I want to ask for unanimous consent on a part of Mr. Santa's written testimony. In your written testimony, which I have read, you have a section that says how important air traffic control is to this bill. That provision was inserted, and with your permission, Madam Chair, and unanimous consent, I'd like for that section of Mr. Santa's testimony to be now known as the Santa Claus. I yield back.
Well, without objection, so ordered, Mr. Bean. With that, my friend from California, Mr. Carbajal, follow that.
Thank you. As long as it's not it's Santa Claus, but not DeSanta something, that might work. Mr. Bunce, I appreciate your testimony highlighting the importance of technology and innovation. One of the provisions that I worked on with Representative Yacom and Davids was a pilot program to deliver clearances via mobile devices. This is intended to help modernize our technology in air traffic control towers and deliver more efficient digital clearances to aircraft through Internet Protocol for general aviation and on-demand Part 135 air operators. Mr. Bunce, can you expand upon how this would work from a user perspective, and Mr. Santa from an air traffic perspective?
Yes, Mr. Carbajal, if you look at what you provided in those provisions, we've worked very closely with Mr. Santa's organization. It's a very collaborative way to be able to take the technology that we have today, just the cell phone technology. When either of us fly and we file a flight plan, we get immediately on our cell phone, we get, this is the routing that you're expected to get. But then we have to go on the radio and we have to confirm that. And when you use the radio, you introduce probability of error that you're going to copy something wrong in that. The technology exists today to be able to get that clearance and to have it and acknowledge it back to Mr. Santa's controllers, and it's done. And it'll make it safer, but also think about now the advanced air mobility vehicles entering into the space. If they're in a very dense metropolitan area, right now they're going to have to get on the radio or the cell phone, and probably the cell phone because radio line of sight may not be working, to be able to get to the controlling agency to be able to say, I need clearance for takeoff. With this technology, we'll be able to do that electronically, and it'll make the system work. Otherwise, it's going to bog down with just calls.
Thank you. Mr. Santa?
I just want to add, we heard a lot about bipartisanship, and this industry works on collaboration. Mr. Bunce and I, whether it's a CEO of an airline, whether it's general aviation, cargo, whatever, we work on our issues. And all the technology, unfortunately, the FAA generally can't provide due to funding, we still work on it. We still embrace the technology that's available and the challenges that we face to try to serve the industry the best we can. And it's something that we're all proud of. And when we sit up here, we don't pre-plan this message or this status. It's in us because we do it and we live it every day.
Thank you. Continuing with you, Mr. Santa, one of the FAA's most successful government industry partnerships is the Contract Tower Program. 262 smaller airports across the country participate in this critically important air traffic safety program, including 21 in California, one of which, the SLO County Airport, is in my district. Can you comment on the importance of the Contract Tower Program to the National Air Transportation System, and what impact will there be on the program if FAA reauthorization is significantly further delayed into next year?
Thank you. I've said many times before, it services some of our smaller airports. And that is a little erroneous. Some of our federal contract tower programs and airports serve hundreds of thousands of airports a year. And that is essential to the safety, the efficiency, and the capacity of those airports, no matter where they're at. With the reauth lapse, those programs get stalled, they get on hold, and there's a real opportunity for them to be canceled. Servicing or losing service to those airports and those regions and those communities, it would damage the economy in this industry.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carbajal. With that, I'll recognize Mr. Molinaro from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm often concerned in following Mr. Bean, so I'm glad to have a little bit of distance. Never know how he's going to ultimately land the plane. Today was no different, but thank you all for your participation. I also want to share a degree of frustration. I certainly know the Senate Majority Leader. I know he flies on a plane. I know he likes airports. I know he likes planes. I know he likes the industry. The fact that we have this hearing at all is entirely unnecessary were the Senate just simply to move forward earnestly with the consideration of FAA reauthorization, and the failure to do so, quite frankly, does threaten a number of sectors within the industry. I want to start with one. The House reauthorization bill includes a provision, a bill that I worked on with committee, that would help to accelerate the emergence of advanced air mobility. Mr. Bunch, you talked a bit about this already, but I'd like to return to it because I see, in particular, electric vertical takeoff and vertical takeoff technology as having great benefit not only to those more congested airports, but also rural airports in places like upstate New York, where there are geographic and topographical challenges. I have an airport in the gorge of upstate New York, for instance, and being able to connect those smaller airports with regional airports will accelerate access to flight and greater transportation capacity. The provision specifically includes a new pilot program to grant funding to airports for expanded access to the electric aircraft charging equipment, which is necessary to make those important upgrades to allow for vertical takeoff. Mr. Bunce, if you could you just expand on what delays in at least reauthorization with this provision mean to the, in particular, eVTOL and VTOL technology and the impact to airports specifically?
Well, sir, at this point in time, it's very critical for us to move out on advanced air mobility, and a delay in getting this reauthorization done is only going to exacerbate what has been created by the movement to what we call a powered lift rating for new pilots in advance, especially these vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So not only will the FAA administrator, as I said earlier, has now a mandate from the overwhelming support bipartisan support he had on his confirmation. And now he's got to be able to focus on areas like having the next gen office, which is really the technology innovator, those that are starting to think about how we're going to provide the charging for multiple different types of aircraft made by different manufacturers to be able to charge the vehicles, and then have, coming from all of our different airports, the ability to get into the airspace. Remember, if we're able to do this properly, we can have small vertiports around that then transport, as you said, to maybe a reliever airport on the outside of a big city. That reduces then the regional transportation that's required at the hubs, because we can put the regional aircraft at these smaller reliever aircraft and increase our capacity at the hubs. So the first step is allowing these airports to have a charging capability for electric aviation and electric vehicles.
I appreciate that, and as I said, the capacity to expand access in upstate New York and rural airports is very important. Mr. Bradbury, do you want to add to that? And if you don't mind, I want to get one last question in, so briefly if you could.
Sure. I just want to say airports really appreciate the pilot program that you've established from this bill. It really will assist airports in eVTOL and advanced air mobility. Very much appreciated.
And I appreciate working with all of you. I also appreciate working with the folks at TWU and Mr. Peterson. I'm grateful that you're here. You're doing fine, by the way. I understand this might be your first time testifying before a congressional committee. Is that true?
That's correct.
You're doing a great
That
job.
is correct.
But I wanted to point to a piece of legislation that we crafted together, the Global Aircraft Maintenance Safety Improvement Act. As you know, America outsources too often repair. You've testified that China is the largest destination for offshore aircraft maintenance jobs. Could you just speak to the kind of maintenance work that's being performed on U.S. aircraft at facilities in China and how this bill addresses that very dangerous status quo?
Sure. So I think the first part of that is the main work being done in China is the heavy maintenance and overhaul, which is the behind the scenes, behind the panels, opening up the aircraft, what the passenger and the flying public doesn't see. That piece of work, I would argue, is critical to the U.S. aviation industry. And to me as a mechanic, knowing that the people that work, our folks, when they work behind that, I know they're FAA certified, I know there's inspectors on the facility and whatnot. In China, I don't know who's working that aircraft. I don't know how they worked on the aircraft. And ultimately, when it lands back in the U.S. and I then take it over, I now become responsible for it.
And I appreciate that. The fact that we don't have this global safety standard would surprise most passengers in this country. It's a pleasure to work with TWU and all of you on this.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Molinaro. I'll recognize Ms. Norton from the district for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and ranking member for holding this hearing to emphasize the importance of passing a long-term Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill soon. As the co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia, which is plagued by aviation noise, I would like to use this opportunity to highlight 2 provisions I got included in the House-passed FAA reauthorization bill, the Securing Growth and Robust Leadership in American Aviation Act, to combat helicopter noise. Helicopter noise can harm health, quality of life, and the structural integrity of homes. In 2019, I led a request to the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study on helicopter noise in the National Capital Region. In 2021, GAO released its study and recommended that the FAA implement a noise sharing mechanism for helicopter operators in the National Capital Region. In 2022, the FAA initiated a pilot program with a private company to create a helicopter noise sharing mechanism in the National Capital Region. After the end of the pilot program, Fairfax and Arlington counties contracted with the private company to maintain the mechanism for solely for Northern Virginia. The FAA fell well short of what GAO recommended. One provision in the bill would require the FAA within 180 days to create and implement a helicopter noise sharing mechanism for all helicopter operations in the National Capital Region and to make the data collected accessible to the public online. This data would help us develop additional solutions to combat helicopter noise. The other provision in the bill would direct GAO to conduct a study on reducing the helicopter noise in DC, almost all of which is created by government helicopters. The study would consider the extent to which military operators consider operating over overpopulated should continue operating over unpopulated areas outside of DC for training missions, the extent to which vehicles or aircraft other than helicopters could be used for emergency and law enforcement response, and the extent to which helicopter operators have assessed and addressed the noise impact of various factors of operating helicopters, including altitude, the number of flights, flight paths, prime time of day of flights, type of aircraft, operating procedures, and pilot training. I would like to close by highlighting a provision I worked on to improve emergency medical equipment, including the contents of emergency medical kits and training required for a flight crew. Flight crews should have the medication and training to address medical emergencies, including anaphylaxis, opioid overdose, and unique needs of children. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. With that, I'll recognize my colleague from New York, Mr. D'Esposito, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to start off with you, Mr. Santa. From reading your biography, I understand that you began your career at the New York TRACON facility in 1997. I want to thank you for your service there, and obviously you're well aware of the issues that they're facing. TRACON N90, right in the center of my district, is probably one of the key facilities that directs planes in and out of and aircrafts in and out of the New York metropolitan area. And obviously, despite the importance of this facility and the necessity of it, it is currently only half-staffed. And I actually have had the opportunity over the last few months to make a visit there and put the boots on the ground and talk to individuals who spend their days and nights in that facility, a very impressive facility, to say the least. Because it is only half-staffed, the FAA has extended cuts to minimum flight requirements and air traffic capacity at New York City area airports through October of 2024. So I just have a few questions for you in regards to TRACON N90. The first is, can you describe in more detail how this substantial staffing shortfall has affected flight operations in New York?
Absolutely. New York TRACON is critically staffed, and it is exceptionally important to the Northeast Corridor, running Kennedy, Newark, LaGuardia operations, amongst other White Plains, Teterboro, and all of the facilities up there that service corporate traffic as well. The short staffing has taken a toll on overtime, obviously. The 6-day work weeks and 10-hour days become the norm. It becomes difficult to continue normal operations of training, normal operations of enhancements, modernizing just airspace routing, and learning the complexity of that airspace becomes a challenge because you're always on. The expectation of those facilities and those airports is to keep capacity as high as you can, obviously with no safety lapses.
Right. So speaking of the safety lapses, obviously with a short staff, there is tendency, I know that there's rules in place, but when I was there visiting and speaking to the leadership, the labor leadership, obviously people that work there, they feel overworked. They're probably fatigued. For those who haven't visited one of these facilities, it's dark. Even in the middle of the day, you would think it's the middle of the night. Has there been any notable incidents that you would attribute to the staffing shortage at the N90 facility?
Their professionalism up there and everywhere is unparalleled. They work, as many of our facilities do, long hours, extra overtime, and a lot of time on position. That facility specifically, if we want to talk about Newark, they've done an exemplary job of basically eliminating delays, delays due to staffing and costs due to staffing, just by tenacious and a lot of hard work and dedication to their trade.
Yeah, they are phenomenal, and I was happy to be able to work with some of my colleagues during the preparation for the FAA reauthorization. There was a proposal to send some of the N90 workers to, I believe, Pennsylvania, and luckily we were able to keep those jobs right in the district and right on Long Island. You also, or someone mentioned that the staffing gap would probably take 5 years to close. As a temporary fix, what steps do you suggest that the FAA can take to enable flights at New York City airports to be at full capacity once again?
Well, unfortunately, the FAA was lapsed in the law to do local hiring. For years, they didn't employ that law, and just recently, they put a bid out, and I think they got over 300 qualified candidates. Hire those candidates into New York TRACON and New York Center. Both of those facilities desperately need them. They can start training. They can return back to some normalcy on their shifts because they're aggressively getting the job done there, whether it be training, servicing the industry, or maintaining the highest safety standards that they need to.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that we've talked about all morning that the expiration at the end of the year would be devastating. Obviously, the CR for transportation expires in January, and I think it's a common theme, one that was mentioned by both my colleague from New York, Mr. Molinaro, and Mr. Bean from Florida. The facts are simple. We have a good piece of bipartisan legislation, and unfortunately, it's following the same route as much other good legislation, like our Secure the Border Act that's been sent over to the Senate and is apparently collecting dust. So I wish we didn't have to have a hearing like this, but I want to thank our leadership, and I hope that days like today maybe light a little fire on the other side of the House to get this piece of legislation off the desk and onto the floor so that you all and the people that you work with can continue the great work that you do. So thank you all. Happy holidays. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. With that, I'll recognize Mr. Allred from Texas for 5 minutes.
Sure. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank y'all for being here and putting up with our questions. This is a crucial moment for the FAA reauthorization process as we look to our colleagues in the Senate to take up our bill. And I really am proud, and I think you've seen a trend here of the bipartisan work that we did in this committee to try and make sure that we could secure the FAA going forward, but also air travel in general. Mr. Santa, I want to begin with you, and I know you've gotten a lot of attention here today for good reason. But controllers at the airports in my region, in the DFW area, are working, as you've talked about today, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and we know that contributes to fatigue, to many things, and you've talked about the safety implications, I think, and you've discussed that in your testimony. If you could talk about the personal impacts that has, because in my experience, part of recruitment and retention is that a job is one that, yes, you can be compensated well for, but also that fits with a family. My wife and I have 2 small children, 4 and 2, and if it doesn't work for your family, then it's hard to get new folks to come into the profession. So what do you see as the personal impacts of this understaffing?
Thanks for the question. I feel like I can say, talk about staffing crisis at any facility that you bring up, and the Dallas area is one of the worst. You talk about Austin traffic, it's just exponentially higher. I do have a little story here I think that really epitomizes the problems that we have, and I will talk about the personal aspect. When you talk about ZFW, which is the Fort Worth Air Route Traffic Control Center, they have 253 certified controllers. Our interim number was 290, that's 10 years old. The new number for the new target number is 295. FAA Finance actually cuts a 10-year-old number to 264. They're working 6-day work weeks, 10-hour days, and FAA Finance says, you're pretty good. It's not where we're at. And you talk about the personal interactions. This is a full-time job, full-time career, shift work, midnights, 6-day work weeks, 10-hour days. Nothing works well when it's critically staffed. You miss ball games, you miss your kids' events, you miss family events, you miss holidays. We're 24/7. This Christmas, there are going to be dozens of people that don't get to wake up and open presents on Christmas because the staffing is abysmal. Specifically, and like I said, anybody that sits and talks to me, I can tell you a specific story about how short-staffed they are.
Well, so the understaffing can lead to more understaffing because then it's harder to get folks to come into it. Mr. Peterson, I wanted to turn to you, and I was so sorry to learn and hear, and I'm glad that you mentioned in your testimony about Michael Ingram's death at the Austin airport in my home state. It's clear that ground workers play an indispensable role from ensuring that baggage and cargo arrive at their intended destination to pushing back aircraft, and they should never face unnecessary dangers at their job. As you mentioned in your testimony, the House-passed FAA bill requires the FAA to conduct a call to action review of ramp worker safety provisions. Can you expand on how that provision is vital to prevent tragic accidents and deaths like Michael's from ever happening again?
Sure, thank you. I think a couple things that are in the bill are critical. One is that management and labor get together and figure out what's going on. The area on the ground hasn't been looked at in years, and obviously the tarmac's changed. DFW, where I'm from as well, is a great example of that, just the expansion and the constant evolution of these airports. And yet the ground equipment and the markings and all those things on the side where we work remains the same. So just finding ways to improve that, finding ways to put in areas for more safe movement on the ramp are critical. Putting in place, rules that work, and nobody knows that better than the people that work on the ground. There's always this argument about cost that we always get into. Sometimes you can't put a value on the cost of a life. The incident in Austin should have never happened. That situation is one that was fatal. We constantly have people getting injured or maimed for no reason because this infrastructure hasn't been looked at in years, and it needs to be addressed, and the bill provides for that, which, again, I thank the committee for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thanks to our witnesses. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. With that, I'll recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank the chair and the ranking member for being open to diverse viewpoints. The aviation, thank you for being here. Folks, the aviation industry is in a state of chaos, in my opinion. Near misses on tarmacs, massive delays and cancellations, industry-wide workforce shortages with no end in sight. I think we've kind of talked about all of them, but there's been a lot of backslapping here today. So I'm going to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following articles. November 11, 2023, Daily Mail exclusive. U.S. Airlines set for worst year ever with more than 1 million departures delayed so far in 2023, nearly a quarter of all flights, fueling holiday chaos fears. November 15, 2023, New York Times, staffing and technology woes threaten aviation safety, report says. September 15, 2023, Wall Street Journal, staffing shortages at air traffic control means more cuts of New York flights. And July 22nd, 2023, CNN, U.S. airline staffing is at its highest level in decades, so why the flight delays?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We ought to be honoring the great, competent people that work in the industry and the deserving travelers they serve, and that includes you folks. We are in the greatest country in the world, the literal birthplace of aviation, and we have the government telling airlines to cut flights and causing massive delays that lead our constituents to be stuck in the airport for hours on end if they are lucky enough to catch their flight at all. The situation is only going to get worse due to a looming pilot shortage that, again, is largely the result of misguided regulations that hinder the ability of the free market to deliver the transportation experience our constituents deserve. These are the issues that we should have addressed in the FAA reauthorization bill. Instead, the House passed a bill that kicks the can down the road for 5 years and allows the situation to fester, killing industry efficiency and threatening airline safety, which is why I did not support the bill. Well, there are consequences to delaying the long-term FAA bill. The consequences of passing a bill that fails to remedy these significant threats to the industry may actually be worse. Well, there are some wins with the House-passed bill. This is the opportunity to put forth a truly transformational FAA reauthorization bill that allows the industry to adapt to the times and meet the moment, providing for the needs of the traveling public. Now, I don't know what the Senate's doing over there. God bless them. I hope they're doing that. I don't believe they're doing that, but I hope that's why there's a delay. But we can still do this if we go back to the drawing board and pass a bill that institutes real changes that will meaningfully address the following issues. Increasing the pilot retirement age, a reform that was included in the House bill over the objections of the Big Four agreement. Lowering the 1,500-hour requirement for flight certification to increase the pipeline of new pilots entering the industry, and removing the politics surrounding that issue. Expanding the number of certified instructors, eliminating much of the essential air service program that misallocates precious resources, which are pilots, flight crews, ground crews, fuel, mechanical equipment, and planes, to routes that are not economically viable at the expense of profitable routes. Increasing the air traffic controller retirement age. Spinning off the air traffic control system into a nonprofit, non-governmental organization similar to the situation in Canada that allows it to operate in an innovative, streamlined fashion. Ensuring airline employees and air traffic controllers are hired based on merit and competence rather than DEI metrics. And eliminating the wasteful Green New Deal programs at the FAA to ensure the agency remains focused on its mission, which is safe and efficient travel. Unfortunately, there are those in the administration, in industry, some in labor, some even folks that are working right here in the building who are benefiting from the status quo and therefore seek to keep the system rigged in that favor. Damn the consequences to our constituents, our bosses, and the flying public. We can, we should, and we must do better. I yield the balance, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I will now recognize the acting ranking member, Ms. Schulten from Michigan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much to our chairman and acting chairwoman, and to our ranking member Cohen for holding this important hearing. And thank you so much to all of our witnesses for bearing with us and coming in here, helping us to draw attention to the critical urgency of reauthorizing the FAA. It bears repeating over and over and over again that the Senate's delay in passing the FAA reauthorization has created significant uncertainty for our aviation industry. And it's critical that this final authorization is passed by December 31st. The time is ticking. Any further delays would negatively impact safety, infrastructure, and operations for our nation's airports. Of course, just like all of the representatives here today, I'm particularly concerned about what this means back home in West Michigan. Impact on Gerald Ford International Airport and Muskegon County Airport in my district. They have benefited from the Airport Improvement Program funding, which is currently jeopardized, and I'm particularly concerned about the impact and delays on these airports for these programs. Mr. Bradbury, you mentioned that short-term extensions hinder the distribution of AIP funding to airports, and airports must then choose one of 3 options. I want to get into that just a little bit more. How are airports affected if they choose to accept their grants based on prorated calculations, and how is that impact different if they choose to wait for a reauthorization, defer, or carry over their entitlements?
Great questions, and obviously with Michigan, also a very tight construction season, and that's the biggest impact for a lot of our northern tier airports when it comes to construction. And you can't prorate a project. That's the real unfortunate part, and I spoke in my testimony that it's a 15 to 20% cost every time you remobilize. So it's inefficient, it's very inefficient, and it caused construction cost increases, which are really difficult for the industry and ultimately hold up a project.
Thank you. Essential testimony for our record. Thank you so much. Mr. Peterson, I want to talk about safety a minute. Like you, I am deeply concerned about the impacts of the delay that they have on safety for our workers. I'm concerned not only for the workers themselves, but as a lawmaker and a protector of my constituents, I'm concerned about their safety. And frankly, as a frequent traveler myself, I'm concerned about my own safety. Someone who gets on a plane twice a week, a mother of 2 young children, and flies away from her family to serve our country, and then hopefully back home safe again. This is personal to so many lawmakers as well, and we want you to know that we take this issue personally and the safety of the workers who help us get to and from our destination safely as well. I want to talk about what the impacts on staffing in particular will continue to look like, if we face these delays, kick the can further and further down the road. Those have significant safety implications, as we've talked about here today, and as we've seen firsthand. So, what will the impact on workforce recruitment and retention be? We know you may not be able to predict with exact certainty, but talk to me about how you see some of that playing out if the Senate continues to delay.
Yeah, well, certainly the Senate delaying this isn't helpful by any means, and we want to see that get done. One element on the maintenance side that I want to just speak to is, as a mechanic, the training during the COVID era. We couldn't train aircraft mechanics, and that pipeline slowed down. So we're seeing that come back up now that people are able to get back into school and do the training. Again, it goes back to a lot of the schools aren't open anymore. Many of the college and even high school programs have just been shut down. We can't get workers into the field if we don't have enough training facilities to get them into the field. So this legislation provides the ability to do that, and we're thankful for that. This isn't new, though. Right. This has been something that we've been arguing about for years, and it goes back several years, about training facilities and training at home and not moving these jobs abroad to where we don't know who is performing what type of work on these aircraft. And again, the traveling public, yourself, your families deserve better.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much. I'll yield back the remainder.
Thank you, Ms. Schulten. With that, I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, representing Oregon's 5th Congressional District, with Portland International just outside of my district, about 15 minutes away, and many municipal airports in the Pacific Northwest that, again, are under threat if we do not pass this FAA reauthorization. So, again, good afternoon, and it's great that we're here today to discuss the continued push for FAA reauthorization, especially during the busiest time of year. And air travel and during the holidays is when people get most anxious about, are they going to get somewhere on time? Reports this year was that Thanksgiving travel set records. This past Sunday alone, TSA reported that almost 3 million travelers were screened. Luckily, there was no significant delays across the U.S. caused by weather or other means. Mr. Santa, you state in your testimony that staffing shortages of air traffic controllers can pose serious risks to not only flight delays and cancellations, but in-flight safety as well. And due to mandatory overtime scheduling, fatigue can be at risk. As you suggest, more accurate operational staffing targets developed by the Collaborative Resources Working Group must be included in FAA's annual controller workforce plan. Can you elaborate on what the CRWG has offered as solutions and how they may address future delays, cancellations, or safety concerns, especially during holiday travel season?
Thank you for the question. So the CRWG numbers started with interviews of all of the 313 FAA facilities to see where they were at, see the needs and the desires of the collaborative groups locally. And the goal was to address 10-year-old expired numbers. Flight schools open and close, destinations, vacation destinations change, corporate traffic ebbs and flows, and commercial traffic changes hubs and destinations as well. To have a model, a staffing model that is 10 years old doesn't serve the industry or the facilities well. So the collaborative group that was jointly developed by Air Traffic Organization of the FAA and NACA, and importantly, it was validated for transparency and repeatability by the MITRE Corporation. Those numbers being implemented and used for the basis of the controller workforce plan will pay dividends for now and in the future to accurately reflect what we need at the facilities in the nests.
Thank you. Of course, there's other reasons for flight delays. As part of the House-passed FAA, I supported an amendment to require DOT to improve reporting requirements for commercial flight cancellations or delays, with the goal of keeping travelers more informed and lead to strategies to mitigate the causes of those delays. Mr. Bradbury, how might this amendment improve the traveling experience for passengers at airports? And further, do you believe airports have a duty to passengers when flights get delayed or canceled? And can you explain how airports are working towards helping to improve that experience?
Absolutely. The experience, obviously, everything comes down to our passengers. We don't exist without passengers. And our ability to connect the passenger to the air transportation system is paramount. So it is critical that we work together to make sure we mitigate issues and make it a seamless travel experience for all of our passengers, not those with mobility improvements, and other disabilities. And this bill helps us to keep that going.
Well, thank you. I think the theme is consistent. We'll have one more at this point. Am I correct? Oh, we're going to have two more. Good. But the theme is correct. We want to make sure that we get this passed. We're working bipartisan, bicameral is what we're hoping, that the Senate will step up and get this done, because I think without this, we're going to see a further delineation. And, you know, as a new legislator, I mean, this is something that we are counting on and that we are working hard to do. So thank you for being here today. And with that, I'll yield back the rest of my time. And Mr. Desaulniers,
Nicely
it is your
done.
turn for 5 minutes.
Must have taken French in high school. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank the committee for having this hearing. I have to say, I look at so many familiar faces who I've worked with on my input on the reauthorization. I'm going to date myself here. I feel like Charlie Brown with Lucy with the football, and Lucy would be the Senate. This was such a success, and there were things in it that I didn't like, and standing alone I would not have voted for. And they're trying to wrestle with those things. So it's with a great deal of anticipation that I hope that we get this done. And in addition, having been involved so much with the Safe Landings Act, which so much of it was my bill that came out of the near miss at SFO 10 years ago, that there's so much possibility, but there's also so much risk with the near misses and the pressure on the system. Mr. Santa, I was just up in SFO's tower again. Your folks, every time I land, I'm afraid they're gonna follow me. It was wonderful as always. I'd like to do more of them in other parts of the country. But what I wanted to talk to you about here, every time I talk, is the illustration, and it's part of our challenge in getting it reauthorized, is when does technology benefit? When is it interacted, which in our Safe Landings Act, clearly those investments has made landing safer by upgrading the technology. And then the human factors, of which I spent so much time with the pilots and with your folks, recognizing you need trained professionals, and also recognizing, has been a long time elected from the San Francisco Bay Area and proud of the tech industry, but also being very aware of the marketing in some of this technology, is getting it right. So when I was up in the tower, it was sort of interesting. There was an incident where the technology didn't work on one of the planes that ran a stop sign on a taxiway. It wasn't dangerous, but it was interesting just hearing the staff respond going, whoa. So getting this right, how do we evaluate the technology to make sure, and the other part is to make sure, not just on the disparity in high-cost areas where so many members are, and I hear when I talk to them that even with the differential, it's not enough to live in places like the Bay Area because of the cost of housing, but then the continuous training. So the vetting on the technology and the procurement side, making sure the people who actually have to use the technology, the pilots and your folks, are part of that to make sure that there is real, true value in it and they're not being seduced by the marketing of the technology. And then the continuous training that they have to get and how we've provided for that for your members and for the FAA.
Yeah, the most important asset we have is our people, is our controllers. They're talented, they're professional, they take a lifetime of effort to learn their skills, and they use them every single day. Thousands of decisions, safety-critical decisions are made every hour you're on position. The technology that we talk about subsidizes that. It helps that. It allows you more information to evaluate. It allows you quicker decision-making tools. And to be part of that, collaboratively to be part of that, to determine the direction of that is essential. Because as I said, the essential nature of our controllers and our people needs to be evaluated by every piece of technology that comes. Luckily, we are involved in those work groups. Unfortunately, the funding and the staffing really isn't there to fulfill them to finality or to completion.
Mr. Bradbury, maybe your experience, I mean, when we've got these pressure on the airports to move people through. I've talked to my friends in the industry and about their profit margins, but technology, getting it right, so as Mr. Sands said, is a complement to the humans being professionally trained. Maybe.
Absolutely, technology is critical to what we do every day, and we're seeing those impacts. And this, having FAA reauthorization gives us more flexibility around terminal funding as well. And huge, we're looking at replacing passenger boarding bridges 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at our terminal just to really improve that experience and make sure we have all the technology and all of the equipment in place to respond to our passenger needs.
Yeah, and just the last thing about SFO, years ago, there was a controversial proposal because of the volume to add another runway in the bay, and it was stopped. But the promise was technology would keep it as safe and keep the volumes as high. And now, anecdotally, I hear that that's a challenge. So I appreciate it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I will now recognize Ms. Wilson from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you for this necessary hearing today. As we work towards the Federal Aviation Administration authorization, we must maintain our global leadership in aviation. To do this, we must consider timely airport infrastructure upgrades and a commitment to bolstering our security. In my district, the Miami International Airport is one of the most active airports for international passengers, with more flights to Latin America and the Caribbean than any other U.S. airport. However, the lack of a Federal Aviation Administration bill has increased security concerns, as seen in a distressing incident this Monday in Miami International Airport. A passenger on an American Airlines flight assaulted multiple airline workers, sending one to the hospital with permanent injuries. This is utterly unacceptable. Our aviation workforce must remain safe and protected from dangerous passengers. Unfortunately, the delayed reauthorization leaves newly confirmed FAA Administrator Whitaker without necessary congressional guidance. He needs clear direction on Congress's FAA priorities to move the FAA forward. Without such direction, we risk the future of the aviation industry and jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs has always been my mantra, and the lack of congressional direction will continue to affect the aviation workforce negatively. An FAA reauthorization bill is not just a piece of legislation. It symbolizes a commitment, the safety of every traveler, a pledge to foster economic development, and an investment in the technological advancement that will propel aviation into the future. With that, I have a few questions for the witnesses. Mr. Peterson, in Section 538 of the FAA reauthorization bill, the bill creates a task force to address issues with the interference of aviation workforce members. Can you talk about the importance of this task force? And can you highlight the labor representatives' critical role in this task force?
Yes, thank you. So first and foremost, I'm aware of the situation in Miami, and that's exactly why this is needed. The folks that work in aviation, we're just trying to do our job, get passengers from point A to point B. When something doesn't go right with a passenger service agent or a flight attendant, it seems that now passengers feel they can abuse them and get physically violent. The task force that could be put in place, one is to figure out how to lower that temperature when those situations happen. And then the second piece is we've got to find a way when this does happen that people are convicted of the right crime. And again, there's jurisdictional issues that come up, not necessarily inside the airport, but certainly on the aircraft with flight attendants that we deal with. But the task force between labor and so to speak, management working together to figure out how to eliminate those types of situations as best as possible is critical. This bill provides for that, and it's been a long time coming. As we've seen in the past couple of years, these numbers just keep escalating. There's got to be a way to bring them down.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, the number of unruly passengers in 2023 drastically outpaced the numbers pre-COVID. This trend has been a growing problem throughout the nation. Locally, we have seen numerous incidents at the Fort Lauderdale Airport. Can you talk about the importance of protecting the workers in the airport, be it gate agents, TSA employees, everyone?
Yeah, and I think that it goes hand in hand, in flight or on the ground. The incident at Fort Lauderdale involved one of our agents, a Spirit agent, just recently. Again, I'm very familiar with the situation. There's this belief, again, that if you're not getting what you want in an airport from an agent, you can abuse them. And it's just simply, there's got to be an agreement somehow between labor and management that passengers who do this, one, aren't allowed to fly for at least some period of time. And the problem we have today is none of that data can be shared. So they just go from one airline to another if an airline does ban somebody. This isn't good for the airport infrastructure. Fort Lauderdale being a great example of that. This has been an ongoing issue in Fort Lauderdale multiple times with people. And so we've got to find a way to put penalties in place for people that are bad actors in the airport or on the aircraft and protect the workers in both those areas.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Thank you. Are there any further questions from members of the committee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing today. I want to thank each and every witness that was here today for your time and your testimony. And with that, this committee stands adjourned.